Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us, and obviously many thanks to Andy. So last time we discussed the cardinal, let's say, values, reason, purpose, self-esteem, and we discussed that. So in very simple terms, Andy, for people maybe who were not here last time, how would we explain in very simple terms values, and what is the difference between a value and a virtue? Because today we're going to discuss the virtues in objectivism. So let's say the very quick version. What are values, and why reason, purpose, and self-esteem are the most important values in like 1-2 minutes?
Well, values, as Ayn Rand points out, values are those things which keep an organism alive, and that we need to strive for in order to gain or retain. You know, food would be an obvious example. That, you know, we need to grow food in order to sustain our lives. Now, so values are, given the nature of an organism, values are that which sustain its life. For human beings, reason, purpose, self-esteem, and I mean, these are things we need to achieve. These are not things that come to us automatically. We need to choose to be rational. We need to choose the actions that will build our self-esteem. We need to choose our purposes in life, and these are cardinal values that enable us to survive. Now, by virtues, Ayn Rand means mental states by means of which we achieve values, and of course, rationality is the fundamental one, as I'm sure we'll discuss today. So there's the standing on one leg version of value. Values keep us alive. Virtues are means by which we achieve that.
All right. So I will start a bit unorthodoxically today. So first of all, for people for whom this is their first contact with virtues, I'm going to go through them very, very quickly. But the first question are not going to be about one of these. So for Rand, the main virtues are independence, which basically means think for yourself, integrity, which in my understanding is make sure that your actions are in accordance with what your mind tells you and what your values are. Honesty, which basically means don't fake reality. Justice, which means judge people according to reality and not make up stuff or don't evade stuff about them. Productiveness, which kind of speaks for itself. And pride, which basically means that you are ambitious in terms of being a good person. Now, my first question, Andy, is there are some things that are shining here by their absence. So, for example, how about exercise? How about strength? How about things that are important to survive? So if we go back to, let's say, a stage of nature, or if we go to a different, throughout history, for example, strength was a virtue that was paramount for someone's survival. And today there are many, people, mostly maybe some in conservative circles, who say, no, strength is the number one characteristic that makes you a man or whatever. So why does Rand focus on these values and on these virtues, and not on most, let's say, conventional ones?
Well, first of all, and that's a good question, because first of all, this is not, Ayn Rand does not consider this an exhaustive list of the virtues. This is a list of what she considers the primary virtues. I'll give you a good example. I mean, strength is certainly important. We had a storm coming through here. It's in New York suburbs yesterday. I don't have any internet. That's why I'm on my phone. So presumably trees got knocked down. Now, we have heavy equipment today that can help move those trees. But still, operating heavy equipment, sometimes this takes manpower. Sometimes this takes muscle power, And so, strength is certainly a virtue. But I think maybe even a better example of one that Ayn Rand did not consider primary and doesn't talk about is just sheer perseverance, stick-to-itiveness, as they call it. I'm reminded of Thomas Edison, who I remember how many substances he tested looking for the proper filament for the electric light, but it was just an exhausting search, and he finally, several years worth of effort, as I recall, as he finally, he stuck to it. He didn't quit. He persevered. And that's even more important than strength, because you know, the development of an electric light bulb, you know, enables life. It catalyzes or facilitates life even more than the ability to, you know, to pick up trees and, and heft them around. Although strength is certainly a virtue. So Ayn Rand did not consider this an exhaustive list. She considered this the primary virtues, and then there are others as well.
One more question before we get down to each of these virtues. So quite often Razi makes fun of me that I spend too much time worrying about what we call, let's say, survival virtues, like what to do if things go very, very bad in the world. So could we say that these virtues that Ayn Rand gives are also in a way historically specific, which means these are virtues mostly for a civilized society, for a society under a rule of law, rather than, let's say, ahistorical virtues, which means that maybe in a different society or in a different era, she would give some different virtues. So for example, to give an example from Atlas, if you haven't read the book, don't listen to what I'm going to say. It's a mega spoiler. The virtues that Francisco and Rearden have to show when they go to rescue Galt from the torture chamber are a bit different from the virtues that they have to show when they are good businessmen. Now, you could say they're still based on rationality and all that stuff, but it's a different set of skills. So are these virtues that Rand presents historically specific, you think, or do you think they're more universal, which not universal in terms of, but they would also apply, let's say, in the desert island, and they were the first ones that would apply in the desert island?
Yeah, I think Ayn Rand considers these universal to human beings. Principles get applied in a context, in different contexts. They may get applied differently. There may be, greater emphasis on strength, like you were talking about in a prehistoric society than there is in a modern, technologically advanced society. Nevertheless, I think Ayn Rand would claim, as I understand objectivism, that man is the rational animal. Aristotle's point from over 2,000 years ago, and rationality is the fundamental means of survival in any era. For example, in a prehistoric society, if we have to, hunt woolly mastodons or whatever, big, powerful beasts, well, we can't tackle them with just strength. We need weapons, and strength won't enable us to figure out how to carve a spear, or later on in history, make a bow and arrow. But even with a spear, gorillas can't do it. They're stronger than us, right? They're vastly stronger than us, but they can't make a spear. And they're highly intelligent animals relative to most of the the higher animals, but they're not nearly as intelligent as us. Our intelligence enable us to, to make those weapons, and our intelligence would enable us to figure out how to deploy them. What's the best way to stalk a woolly mastodon? Do we just run after it, 50 guys with spears, or do we try to surround it, or we sneak up, behind it? Do we figure out what's downwind of it so it can't smell us? We need a strategy. In effect, that's a military strategy. And similarly, when we're fighting off rival tribes, prehistoric caveman times, endless tribal warfare, we got to fight off our enemy tribes. Presumably, the ones that won generally were the ones that figured out better military tactics or military strategy in fighting off their enemy. Certainly, that's why historically later on, why your boy Alexander, how did he conquer the mighty Persian Empire with this tiny Macedonian army? Well, I mean, the Macedonians were some tough guys without a doubt, but the Persians were no sissies themselves. Alexander, was a brilliant field general. And he out-generaled, what was it, Darius, I think was the Persian Empire. Military tactics, military strategy, that's all brain power. It's not an accident he was Aristotle's student, for a year and a half. So, mind power everywhere and at all times is the cardinal survival virtue for human beings.
Well, later maybe in the discussion, I'd like my Jim brother in spirit, George, give me also his take on whether strength should be in the list of virtues. But anyway, let's move to the ones that are actually on the list and not the ones that maybe should be on the list. So let's start with independence. No, actually, let's take them in relation to the values. So rationality is the virtue corresponding to the value of reason. Could you give us the link there?
Well,
and the difference, because quite often we use these terms interchangeably.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we should establish Ayn Rand's main point, and this is the theme of Atlas Shrugged. Maybe we don't want to give away the plot in Atlas because it's a mystery story, but the theme, of course, is that the mind is mankind's means of survival. And Ayn Rand's right. We're just given examples in primitive societies or ancient societies, you know, designing weapons, military tactics or strategy, but also as society advances, the means by which we advance is the development of rationality. You know, we learned how to grow crops and developed agricultural science. We learned how to domesticate livestock. We learned how to build homes and cities. We learned how to heat them, you know, in the winter and air condition them in the summer. We learned how to cure diseases. And the human life expectancy today is in the Western world, at least for a girl born today, is 80 years. But it used to be, you know, 20 years. So and also I think you should point out rationality is a survival tool in every context. That is, how do we avoid conflicts or resolve conflicts to the extent that we do. We rationally negotiate some settlement, whether it's interpersonal or international, satisfactory to all parties. I would that we would do that more often, but when we do, that's the means by which we do. And when we don't do, it's because our passions, you know, whether it's aggressive desire for power or wealth, or to rape, rob, and pillage, overcome our rational faculty. Reason is volition. So anyway, in every form, way, and context, whether it's psychotherapy or rational negotiations or curing diseases or growing food, in every way, shape, and form, rationality is our survival insurance. Now, I think Ayn Rand distinguishes between reason as a value and rationality as a virtue. Subtle distinction, but rationality, virtues are mental states, or mental traits. They're means by which we achieve values. If reasons of value, I think what Ayn Rand is saying to us is it's something we need to cultivate. It's something we need to achieve. I think she's pointing out here that man is a being of volitional consciousness. It doesn't function automatically the way our sense organs do. We need to choose to reason. In that sense, it's a value. And all too often, human beings don't do it. I mean, the Nazis are a perfect example. You couldn't reason with Hitler. There was no reason with him. They were the master race. They were going to conquer the world. There was no reasoning with him. They abandoned reason for their passions. We just feel it in our blood and our bowels that we're superior. They abandoned reason. And so all we could do is defend ourselves against all too often historically, whether it's rapists, murderers, dictators, slave drivers, human beings abandoned to let themselves be driven into action by their passions. To actually cultivate reason is an enormous achievement. It's a value that we need to achieve. We need to accomplish. It's steps we need to take to attain reason.
Right. Let me say to people that this is not the same as the Mondays format, so you can jump in whenever you want with any question. So to make sure we go through them, let's commit ourselves. We try to deal no more than 5-6 minutes for every virtue, because then we can also take questions. So I think rationality is quite simple, no major kind of questions here. What about the value of purpose and its related virtue, which is productiveness? And mostly I'm asking because one of the biggest minds in history, if not the biggest, Aristotle, had a quite different view about productiveness. So for many ancients, the ideal was that you don't have that much to do. You sit down, you relax, and even today, there's this very strong cultural element that says, there's this story that says, if this millionaire discusses with this fisherman, and the fisherman says, "Why do you want to make money?" "Because I want to, do this." "And what are you gonna do with this?" "Oh, then one day I'm gonna retire and be a fisherman like you." And the fisherman says, "So why don't you do this already?" So there's a lot of, let's say, pushback against productiveness being a virtue. And a lot of people say, "Oh, this is the Protestant ethic." My mother keeps telling says this to me all the time. "Oh, you're such a Protestant, productiveness is not so." so important. So why do people have this misunderstanding, and why does Rand believe that productiveness is a virtue?
Yeah, good question, because we had this discussion, a similar one, several months ago with your old flame, Dr. Frawley. Was that her name?
Yeah, but that's not my opinion.
Whatever. Obviously, very intelligent, educated. Okay, Freddy, sorry, I got it wrong. But obviously, very intelligent, educated woman, very attractive woman, that without a doubt. But the point I was making in that discussion, and I'll reiterate today, and that Ayn Rand really stresses, is that we need to be productive is mandated by nature. To put it simply, we don't live in a Garden of Eden. We don't live in a world with all the values our lives require are already made for us. We need to create them. We need to produce them. I mean, the food is an obvious example or the best example, because we need it every day. Well, most people do. Certainly Americans do. But we need sustenance on a regular basis. Maybe we go a couple of days without food, but we need food on a regular basis. If we just hunters and gatherers, well, even that is a type of productivity. It takes effort to climb the trees to get the coconuts or the fruit or whatever, or hunt down the animal and fight off the saber-toothed tiger that's competing with you. That takes effort, but at the mercy of the weather. Then as soon as there's a drought, the vegetative life dies off, the animal life dies off, or it migrates. You're at the mercy of the weather. In a more advanced society, we grow food, and technologically advanced, we're better equipped to deal with storms. And it's ironic I should say that now, because I don't have any internet because of the storm. But we're better advanced to grow crops when it's better equipped to grow crops when it's cold, or there's locusts or whatever. We're better equipped to fight off these natural disasters. Look, the environmentalists always like to say how wonderful nature is and how benign nature is. SBS. Nature can be brutal, man. I mean, nature, with a freezing cold winters, or withering hot summers, or droughts, or tornadoes, or earthquakes, or volcanoes. I mean, nature can be brutally rough to survive in, and we need to be productive. We need to learn how to grow crops and build houses, and and build cities, and and cure diseases. Yeah, of course, we're in the midst of a pandemic. That's very natural to have these horrible diseases. Whether it was cholera and dysentery or diphtheria or typhus or smallpox, that's very natural. We need to be productive to learn how to cure diseases.
Question here. So again, I'm playing devil's advocate, but someone would tell you, oh, you're privileged because, for example, if you work in construction or if you work in a coal mine, then the best day of the week is Saturday because you don't have to be there. So it's one thing to say, oh, I love my job, I love being productive, let's say when you do what you do, which you enjoy, but for the vast majority of people, work is seen more like a curse. By the way, very interesting. In the Bible, when Adam is expelled from heaven, one of his punishments is work. So this element is also very strong in Christianity, that work, that toil is seen as something bad. So that's a very revolutionary take by Rand, which says that no, productiveness is a virtue.
Well, even with that true, and we could dispute that, that there may well be people doing manual labor who love their job or find it fulfilling. Certainly, you could see why they're building stuff, or they're extracting the ores from the earth that help heat their homes, whatever. But even if it was completely onerous to the workers in question, it doesn't change the principle that we need to do this in order to live. We need to build houses, and we need to extract iron ore and coal and oil, from the earth. We need to do these things in order to promote human life, including the worker's life and the worker's children. So even if we're true that it certainly is true that a lot of people hate their jobs, including philosophy professors, by the way. I won't mention names. I hear them all the time complaining about the students, whining about it endlessly, and they seem very unhappy, at their work. But even if that were true, it doesn't change the principle that human beings need to be productive in order to survive and in order to flourish. I think a good metaphor by means of which to think of this is the one you just referenced. We don't live in a Garden of Eden, and this is why we have to be productive, otherwise we're going to die. So I would say to the iron worker who hates his job, one, develop your skills and maybe you can find a job that you love more, or two, learn to love that job. But three, what you do is enormously important for everybody's life, including you, your wife, and your children.
Yeah, and anyway, let's stick to the 5 to 6 minutes per virtue. So I'll go to the next one, which is the one I need your help, because throughout all my years trying to understand objectivism, I kind of get stuck a bit. Self-esteem and pride. I think Rand is not using pride in the way that it's mostly used. So she calls it moral ambitiousness. Right. But I can be ambitious but not proud because I've screwed things up. So could you break down self-esteem, because we didn't have much time to discuss it, as a value, and why pride is the relative virtue, and what does it mean by moral ambitiousness?
Okay. But before I answer, I just want to point out, I'm not an expert in moral philosophy. I mean, Tara Smith, Greg Salmieri, they may be, people who could give you better answers than I can. But the best I understand this, I'm a generalist in philosophy and in objectivism. I think of self-esteem as mostly as a psychological state. And it's something that has to be, again, it's something that has to be achieved, especially if you grow up in a crazy family and your mom or dad are violent and or verbally abusive, and the kid, internalizes that by, I must be bad. Why else would mom or dad be so angry at me? And you grow up in some kind of crazy family like that. And self-esteem is a real achievement to reach, the sense that I'm good rather than I'm bad. And you properly point out religion. The concept of original sin is responsible for more low self-esteem and more self-loathing probably than any, than any other factor in history. So it's a psychological state that needs to be achieved by means of doing good and seeing yourself doing good. And today maybe psychology. Now, pride as a form of moral ambitiousness. Yeah, this is revolutionary, because again, what does religion, Judeo-Christian tradition tell us about pride? It's a sin. I mean, and you can see why. If we're sinful beings, we have nothing to be proud of. We should be humble before God's perfection. But Ayn Rand's point is that pride is moral ambitiousness. Pride is a way of life. It's not just an inner state. I think of self-esteem as mostly an inner psychological state. But pride is a way of life. If I can put it somewhat paradoxically, pride is living a life of which I can be proud. So I identify what my flaws are. Maybe I'm not nearly as good a father to my daughter as I might be. And I got a bad temper, and I erupt. Or whether it would be better if I just stayed calm, especially dealing with leftists. I can identify what my vices are. Or in somebody else's case, I drink too much, or I'm smoking too heavily, or I'm eating a terrible diet. Whatever it is. Identify my errors, my flaws, my vices, my moral failings, and then commit myself to working on them. Commit myself to a process of self-perfection, which can be an arduous process. But I keep working at it to make myself better. I think that's what Ayn Rand means by moral ambitiousness, and I think that's the way we develop our self-esteem. You have a much better self-image, a much stronger self-concept of it.
So yeah, but why the term pride? Because pride is basically means, the way I understand it, and tell me if you agree, I've done the work and I'll probably see the results. So I've done what I should have done, so I can lift my head up. Am I right?
Yeah, I've done it, and I have to keep doing it every day. Every day is a new challenge. I give a good example of people who had an alcohol problem or drug problem, and they overcome it. For people who've done this, tell me that the desire for the drug gets attenuated over time, but it never goes away fully. And every day is a new challenge. Especially if you're stressed out over some bad thing that happens in your life, and I hate to sound religious that you resist the temptation, but rationally this is not good for me, and it's not good for the people I love or the people who love me. And so, I dedicate myself to life promoting values rather than life harming ones every single day by volitional choice.
And one more point on self-esteem, and then we'll move on. I think what we see today from so-called SJWs, or however you want to call them, identitarians, the number one thing they do is they attack your self-esteem in various ways. They tell you, for example, which was today's topic of the show, 2 + 2 = 5. They basically tell you your mind is impotent. They tell you that you have original sin because you're white or you're a man or whatever. They tell you that basically shut up, stand on the corner and be quiet and leave other people to talk, people who are marginalized or whatever. So every single aspect of their philosophy, every single one of them, is an attack on your self-esteem. So in a way, they are worse than religion, because at least religion told you, yeah, do all that and we're gonna love you and you're gonna get something. These people tell you, we hate you, do all that, and nothing is gonna come out of that. It's basically self-destruct for self-destruction's sake, philosophically, again.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. They're Marxists, they're not Christians. And I've argued and will argue till the day I'm died that Marxism is a vastly more evil philosophy than Christianity. Yeah, and you're right. The original sin here is it's untreatable. In religion, if you love God and you accept Jesus in your heart as your savior, you can become good. But Marxism, like National Socialism, it's a deterministic philosophy. We're born with this guilt. You're white, you're male, whatever, and it's ineradicable. There's nothing you can do about it. So you're guilty for all of the crimes of the white people in the past, slave drivers, for example. For some reason, you don't get credit for all the great achievements of Western civilization, most of which, white people, whether it's Aristotle, Newton, Shakespeare, Beethoven, whatever, Edison, whatever. You don't get any credit for that, which is actually right. But you get guilt and a sinful attitude, and your moral turpitude for whatever crimes people of your race perpetrated. So it's a viciously irrational, deterministic attack on somebody simply because of their race and gender, things that an individual doesn't choose. You don't choose your race, you don't choose your gender. And the rational moral principle here is judge yourself and judge others by reference to what is within their capacity to choose, not something that's hardwired into their nature. There's no moral responsibility for better or for worse for things that you can make no choices about.
So as I say every time, I disagree with you that Marxist and postmodernists are kind of on the same continuum. But anyway, that's a minor point, because I get what you mean. There is tribalism and collectivism is on, let's say, the background of both. So Ragnar's dad says, semi-humorously, but I don't think it's I think that's a deep comment if we dig a bit, and I'll explain why. Strength is the virtue of virtues. And I think there's something there, because if you think about it, you need persistence, and you need. So remember, for example, all the examples in the Fountainhead where Rourke stays up for like 3 nights, or Rourke breaks the rock, and it's kind of his whole body's vibrating, and you can't persuade me that for Rand physicality is not like a big thing. That strength is definitely celebrated, and I'm not talking about it in this kind of quasi-fascist, like, the Aryan body, whatever. But the idea that in order to pursue these virtues, you need to have this element of, so the mental and the physical are interconnected. That's why I would put strength almost on a similar category with, for example, productiveness, or as you said, perseverance. So the more I think about it, the more I see strength of character, but also strength of the body as something which is important. And I don't mean, again, strength of the body as a bodybuilder, but pushing yourself to your limits. And again, see what Rourke does. What Rourke does is not only pushing himself to the limit mentally. Rourke stays up for like 3 nights. By the way, don't do it. Don't compromise your sleep. It's not a good idea. Rourke literally breaks the rock. So moral strength with like physical strength as imposing your will on nature, which is what environmentalists freak out with the idea, and they consider it too like masculinist or whatever. I think there's something there. By the way, Ragnar's dad, feel free if you want to come live to comment a bit more on the issue of strength, because I think there's something there.
I've been raising my hand for like an hour, but George wants to jump.
You can't because you're a host.
Yeah, I've been doing this. But anyway, yeah, let's go to Ragnar's dad first, and then I will critique what both of you say, I'm guessing.
Yeah, all right. So, so you brought up the example of strength of character. Strength is used in many contexts. So, for example, you can refer to military strength, or you can say, you know, this lock is a very strong lock. So what do all these strengths do? Well, they protect you against those that want to come and take away the values from you without asking you. They preserve your independence. So strength, in a way, helps you sustain all your other virtues and the outcomes of your virtues, the values that you attained from those virtues. So, and also strength can be linked to productiveness in the case that you are an athlete, right? And you are entertaining people with your strength. You need that virtue as a secondary, not as a primary in this context, in order to perform, to be productive and to entertain people, because you lift heavy weights or whatever it is that you do as an athlete.
By the way, Ragnar, are you in New York?
No, that's just my background.
Okay,
I wish. I'm in London, unfortunately.
All right.
So yeah, that's what I want to say. It's strength, and also strength can be linked to rationality, because, you know, having, for example, a very strong military power as a nation or as a country does not necessarily mean that you have physically very strong soldiers. What you have is you may have very innovative weapons. You have the best weapons. So there, in order to have the best weapons, you probably used human ingenuity in order to develop them. You did research and development, you know, to come up with the best weapons that you could. So that way you can beat an army of much larger, both in terms of numbers and in terms of physical strength soldiers.
So I like this idea of strength as protecting value so much that actually I'm going to write it down for further thought. So very good point, thanks. But apparently Razi disagrees, so let's see what he has to say.
First of all, Nikos, you're you know, I don't know who you think objects to the idea that, you know, mind and body are both important. But the thing is, you know, you need strength for certain things, and those things you understand that you need, you know, physical strength for by using primarily your mind. And beyond that, you know, the question of physical strength is very, very, very contextual. You know, if you are, you know, if you have to lift heavy things for a living, you need to be much stronger than if you're, you know, working on a, you know, startup or whatever. So the mind-body integration, I think, is kind of a you know, a basic that we can all agree on. But I think the extent to which you need you know, certain, you know, physical strength, or you know, you and I disagree on how important being ready for physical fights is. That very much depends on context, and I don't think I think you take it too far in the physical strength direction.
Let me say something here. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt in objectivism. Nikos is right. You know, in Ayn Rand's novels, you know, that there's no doubt physical strength is a virtue. It has survival. It has survival value for us, you know, in any number of ways. You know, dealing with nature, you know, being productive, and dealing with bad guys, you know, socially. And I think also Ayn Rand, you know, shows this romantically, you know, in her novels. Now Dominique, you know, responds to rock in part, you know, it's his ability to break rocks and stuff. But there's a lot of guys in the Granite Quarry there that are physically strong that can break rocks. The key point, of course, that Ayn Rand emphasizes is the moral strength. That's physical strength in the absence of moral strength is not only not a virtue, it's a vice. It's villainous. It's dangerous. Physical strength and intellectual strength has to be wedded to moral strength, to the commitment to human life. That's the fundamental value. Once we have that, physical strength definitely has survival value, but intellectual strength has much more. So I mean, I think that's Ayn Rand's point. And romantically, it has value. You know, Dominique as a hero worshiper, she wants to surrender to a man. A man is, you know, has bodily strength, but it doesn't have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. He just has to have the strength of a physical strength of a man. It's got to be wedded, above all, it's got to be wedded to moral strength. That's, you know, Dominique picked him, Rock, out of all these.
Yeah, and remember how Rand describes that poet who throws himself on Dominique, and Dominique is like, ew, which is, which it's his moral character which is weak, but this moral character's weakness has almost like a physical expression. So with Rand, you see that someone's expression, someone's morality, in a way is mirrored on their face, so to speak, right? And again, this has nothing to do with whatever. It has to do with how you carry, in a way, yourself, and how you carry yourself as like the embodiment, literally, of your moral values. Anyway,
yeah,
Razi,
it's mind-body integration, which, so both are important. And before we go to Boris, can I say that my deadlift 1 rep max is the same as George's? Boris.
I didn't know that. That's
True story.
No, actually, I think that my question has just partially been answered anyway. Because I was actually going to wonder about, isn't strength a sort of a very relative virtue, but we already said now that it's very much tied to the rest of morality, because it can easily be used for very bad things, and you know, imposing yourself on others, even if we're talking about nations or individuals. But in one way, isn't actually rationality sort of being used as a substitute for physical strength, not moral strength? That we as humanity use our rationality to actually achieve feats that make physical strength actually less important. But obviously, again, this question has not partially been answered. So
that's definitely a point, and that's why, for example, even on a sports, if you follow sports, for example, the thing I loved in Pep Guardiola's Barcelona was that these players looked like almost like ballet dancers. If you remember that this year's Chelsea, they were like huge guys. They looked like rugby players. And Barcelona, with the mind of Pep and his players, dominated. Or that's why I prefer jiu-jitsu to boxing, because in jiu-jitsu, within limits, the smaller guy can prevail towards the bigger guy using mostly the mind. So I agree with you. I'm just saying that quite often, the ability to put your values in action, so to speak, also requires that you are this element of strength. And again, it's what we said with beauty of character and outside beauty are one and the same. It doesn't mean that you have to be thin or V-shaped, whatever. It means whether your values are in a way mirrored or embodied in how you carry yourself. Of course, there are exceptions, right? Sometimes there are, I don't know, accidents, things that don't allow you, bad genetics, whatever. No question about that. So don't take this as a point. I'm just saying that even within someone's character, I think that strength is like a candidate that should be there. Okay, someone has his hands up. Ragnar's dad.
Wait, let me say something while we're waiting for George, Nikos.
Oh, okay, yeah, go on, Andy, then we go to George.
Of bodily strength. You know, I think, again, it has survival value. We have to do a lot of physical labor to build houses, you know, dig mines, work in the mines and everything. And with advanced machinery that we have today, women are certainly capable of doing it, but relatively men are more capable of doing it because this involves, muscular effort. This involves muscular strength. So men are better suited to do all this heavy productive work than women are. Although I think women could do it if there was a society somewhere where there weren't any men. I think women could do it, but men could do it better, right? Just like in sports. I mean, you could take the best women tennis players or the best women football players or the best women basketball players, and you pit them against the best men. They almost every time, maybe every time, they're going to lose because the men are bigger, stronger, faster. So the physical strength does have productive value in doing the heavy work that very often we need to do to build homes,
with the asterisk though, that as Rand said, this is not a moral issue. So let's say if you can lift more, and let's say Rearden can lift more than Dagny, but that has nothing to do with their moral value. I'm just saying it in case our statements are taken out of context and we get into trouble.
Context anyway, but you're absolutely right.
Okay, let's go to George.
So I'm now going to speak a bit in favor of rationality over physical strength, because in my opinion, there's two main reasons why rationality comes first. The first one is, throughout the course of human civilization, what humans are striving for is to make physical strength decreasingly relevant, less and less relevant. So when you didn't have excavators, someone who could dig really well in order to build a big building, that person was invaluable. Their labor was very important. Now, since excavators have been invented using the human mind, the ability to dig is less important. Same with warfare. When cavemen were fighting each other with their bare hands, having big numbers and big soldiers was important. Now you can kill millions of cavemen using one nuclear bomb. Therefore, it doesn't matter how many or how strong they are. And that's the second part I want to come to, is the numbers. Rationality is mostly an individual thing, whilst physical strength is more of a collectivist thing. You can have, let's say, two people with a strength level that they can push, let's say, 50 kilos, each of them. You put them together to push something that needs 100 kilos of push, they can push it, right? You take 5 people that can push 20 kilos each, they can push that 100 kilo thing that needs to be pushed. You cannot do the same with IQ. So you cannot have a task that requires the IQ of 100 done by 5 people that have IQ of 20. They're still not going to be able to do it. You need a person that has IQ of 100 in order to get the results. So you only need one, and that one is enough. It doesn't matter if you have millions of 20 IQ people. You're still not going to push the thing that needs 100 IQ. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and it's very interesting what you said with strength. Even the biggest example, let's say, of virtue strength in history, let's say the Spartans, if they didn't have clever tactic to wait the Persians in Thermopylae, in the hot gates, they would be defeated in like 10 seconds. Their mind and the way they maneuvered so as to wait the Persians specific on that ground that give them the tactical advantage, and also their tactical superiority towards the Persians, made sure that their physical strength, which was unquestionably of the highest level, could be used. Otherwise, merely their brute force would lead them to very quick death. So I agree with that. Okay, if we have no other point, can we move to integrity? And the issue, so integrity basically means, actually, let me use the exact way that Rand uses the term, and actually I can't find it, but integrity means that your actions are in tune, let's say, with your values. that you don't say one thing and you don't do another thing. First of all, Andy, let me know if this is the case. And second, let me ask you a question. Quite often, specifically in Greece, we use integrity as completely out of context. So the average person in Greece is going to tell you the Communist Party, which is basically the pro-Soviet Union Marxist-Leninist party that I used to be a member in my youth. They say the Communist Party deserves our respect because it keeps its integrity. That no matter what, no matter how the time changes, they're always the same. And many of its members are actually very poor. Therefore, we need to take our hat off to the Communist Party because they have integrity. So first question, is integrity indeed making sure that your actions are in tune with your values? And if this is the case, why shouldn't we say that the Communist Party is indeed a paragon of integrity, as is, again, the common misunderstanding in Greece?
Well, I like the way Leonard Peikoff formulates this in OPAR. You know, the conventional view, of course, is that integrity is the practice what you preach virtue. That you have certain principles and then you live by them in action. You don't contradict them in action. You're not a hypocrite. And Ayn Rand says, no, there's another element here. And Leonard Peikoff puts it very nicely, that integrity is commitment in practice to rational principles, to life-giving principles. It's not commitment to just any principles. I mean, if integrity meant commitment in practice to any principles, then Hitler would be one of the most principled men of history, a man of integrity, because he held principles, the existence of a master race, the rightful supremacy of the master race to conquer, enslave, and/or annihilate, inferior races. He lived by those principles. He died for those principles. Does that make him a man of integrity? No. He's eliminating or pushing aside rationality, which is mankind's survival instrument. He's a mass murderer of millions of innocent people. Integrity does not mean commitment in action to irrational, death-dealing principles. As similarly for the communists, they deserve nothing but the strictest moral condemnation. Their philosophy is one of inveterate class warfare and violence and mass murder of the owning class, mass murder of people who, in a semi-free society, in a capitalist economy, rose to the top because of their talent, their industriousness, their productivity. Real heroes. Communists explicitly want to murder them. They're a murderous organization. They deserve nothing but condemnation. Integrity is commitment in action to rational life-giving principles, not irrational death-dealing ones.
Now, one last thing about integrity before we move to the next one. So Peikoff, in his podcast, when he was asked about John McCain, so McCain, for those of you who remember, he was captured by the Viet Congs, he was tortured, and for some time he would not give in to torture. And they've asked, although he did it in a way from a self-sacrifice point of view, but anyway, that's another discussion. So someone asked Peikoff, is McCain virtuous for doing this? And he says, he gives an answer which says it's kind of a complex case, but he says, but I recognize he had some form of integrity. So you could have integrity in mixed premises also, right? Like, so you could recognize some form of, and another example is in We the Living, where Andrew Taganov and the general of the whites, they kind of help each other walk towards that flag which they can't see the light, because they recognize that, yeah, you're brave, wrong cause, but within this context, I kind of respect this. So could we say that you could recognize integrity even to people with mixed or sometimes wrong premises?
Oh yeah, definitely. John McCain's a good example. I mean, he's a real hero. As a Navy flyer down by the North Vietnamese, imprisoned in the Bien Hoa prison, where they tortured American flyers. The American Air Force and Navy guys called it the Hanoi Hilton. you know, and they tortured them to sign proclamations that America was committing war crimes, you know, against the communists. Now, I got to tell you the truth. If it were me, they wouldn't have had to torture me. All they would have had to do was threaten me with torture, and I would have signed. And I think there's no moral condemnation. Was Ayn Rand say morality ends at the point of a gun? There's no moral condemnation to be placed on the person who does that. The moral condemnation goes to the brutes, you know, who use brute force, torture to, you know, to force somebody to sign. But the military has a good expression for that, you know, courage above and beyond the call of duty. And I think John McCain, as a naval officer, showed courage above and beyond the call of duty, that he refused to sign and he withstood the torture. And I absolutely, you know, salute him for having much greater courage and integrity in that context than I would ever have. But as a politician, you know, as a U.S. senator and as a presidential candidate, John McCain was a statist. He should have been a Democrat. So, you know, but before I would, he was a rhino, you know, Republican in name only. If Republicans are supposed to support capitalism, McCain certainly did not. But you know, before I criticized McCain as a politician, I would praise him for 6 months, you know, as an enormously courageous naval officer during the Vietnam War. So I think, yeah, definitely he had integrity as a naval officer. However mistaken and even irrational his political views were, you know, as a politician.
Yeah, and there's more context there, like, you know, what was the point of the war in Vietnam and all that stuff. But anyway, that's another discussion. So Daniel gave us a good, he gave us basically how Galt describes integrity in Atlas Shrugged. By the way, another interesting issue is how Rand, I think at 2 different points in her life, she had a different number of virtues. So at some points she kind of changed them. She added some, but not so much in terms of the essence, but in terms of the categorization. But that's a bit deeper, so we can leave it for now. So the next one is honesty. And honesty, she describes it as one must never seek or grant never attempt to fake reality in any matter. And the usual thing here, so as Razi said in the beginning, we are running some in-depth courses on objectivism only for members, which are very, very intense. And one of the longest discussions we had was how honesty is not the same as not lying, right? And honesty is not the same as maybe not saying a white lie. So for example, I had a dilemma. So my father had built a summer house somewhere, and he was building it from like 2012. So we don't live with my father, so he has like a life which I don't follow on a day-by-day basis. So he wanted to surprise me with this summer house. Now I've known for this house for like 3 years, but I visited first time this year. And the question I had was, because he thought I didn't know, but obviously I knew from other people who helped him build that. So my question was, if I was like, oh, I didn't know that you have this house and I'm so surprised, would this be like a breach of honesty? Or within that context, like, you know, I would make him happy because he was, all these years he was waiting where I would see it for the first time. So is this basically a breach of honesty, or is this an innocent lie, so to speak, which is not a bad thing?
I missed part of that, Nikos, because my internet here was fading in and out. But if I understood you correctly, no, that's just that Ayn Rand means by dishonesty that you're gaining values by faking reality. And from what I got from your story, this person was doing a benefit to somebody. It wasn't illicitly gaining X from somebody. It's like hiding a present that you have for a person until their birthday, you know, until Christmas or whatever. You don't want them, you hide it from them. You make up some story. What's that package in the attic? You know, you make up some story about it because, you know, you want to give the person the utmost benefit from it. So it's not gaining some value illicit. So that's what Ayn Rand means by dishonesty is faking reality in order to gain a value that you don't deserve and have no right to. You know who's a really good example of that, Nikos? If people remember the former Wall Street businessman who became a swindler, Bernie Madoff. You know, Bernie Madoff was a successful broker on Wall Street. I mean, as an honest man, and made money for his clients. Honestly, at some point he got the idea he could have more money if he swindled his clients rather than made money for them. And he built up this whole fabric of lies about how his customers' accounts were actually prospering while he was, embezzling their money. Now, some of these people followed their accounts and the companies, and they had questions, and he had to keep making up lies in order to cover, his embezzlement. And when they came back, they did some more research on the company. They came back with more questions. He had to make up more lies. He was living in, he tried to construct this network of lies that was almost like a fantasy world in competition to reality. And you can't live in that world. It doesn't exist. The more perspicuous somebody is, the more insightful they are, the more probing their questions, the more this house of cards, has a tendency to collapse. And it would be no surprise to Ayn Rand that Bernie Madoff said once he was in prison, he said that he was less unhappy in prison than he was when he was living large, with his jets and his yachts and his New York City apartments, and everything. And the reason for that had to be all the pressure of trying to keep up the lies. Remember what lies they told to what person on what day, and how to back that up with more BS when they come back with more questions. All that pressure of trying to live in this fabricated world that doesn't exist was off of him now. And I think well, there's a perfect example of why what dishonesty is and why it is completely self-destructive.
Well, Stephanie here says that she thinks it's a breach of, so if you say you're surprised by someone who wants to show you something that he's really proud of, she says if you fake surprise, in a way you fake reality, and you don't have to fake enthusiasm. Yeah, to be honest, at the end, I went for by the line and said, look, I know I'm so proud for you for your new house, but to be honest, I've known about it, but still I'm so excited about you. But I think even if I faked surprise, I don't think it would be a breach of reality, because yeah, it's basically, I don't know. So the takeaway from this is that honesty is not necessarily the same as never lying. And the obvious example that is the usual that Rand leaves, if someone puts a gun against your head and says, where have you hidden your children? And obviously you lie, that's not a breach of honesty, because honesty means recognize the facts of reality and act based on them. And the fact of reality is that a thug has a gun against my head, and I need to, unprovoked, and I need to survive this. So I'm going to lie to him, I'm going to deceive him, I'm going to do anything possible. By the way, as opposed to our friends, the libertarians, who don't understand this context thing. So for example, they say, oh, I'm a pacifist, and this means even if they attack me, which they don't get this element. Now, some of them, okay, not all of them. But I've heard an otherwise good Austrian economist saying, for example, well, my principle is that you should never use value, therefore I wouldn't even use defensive value, which means that defensive force. So this means they don't understand what is the context and why do we have values and virtues. We have them because you have to live life in a specific way. And if the thug attacks you, you're not gonna be. Yeah, libertarians are not pacifists in general. Yes, that's why I said you're right, and I talked about the specific libertarian. I think it was Bob Murphy who is a pacifist, and he's one of the best Austrian economists, but he's not good in issues of defensive force, so to speak. Okay, time flies, so let's go to the next virtue. Justice. Never seek or grant the unearned and undeserved, neither in matter nor in spirit. So, quick commentary on justice, and also, do us a quick presentation on what justice is, and then I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure. Again, I love Dr. Peikoff's explanation in OPAR. you know, is with justice, you go by one, the facts of the case. What has the person done, and what has the person not done? You go by the evidence. And two, we judge the evidence by a rational standard of value, namely that human life is the standard of moral value. So we judge the action, the actions the person commits by reference to whether these actions are life-giving or whether, you know, whether they're life-harming. And in that sense, you know, and it reminds me of what you know, Francisco says to Reardon, you know, in Atlas, that, you know, you wouldn't let some imperfection into your, you know, into your metals. Why do you let this imperfection into your moral code and the way you judge your family members and, you know, and the looters, you know, these other members of society? We need a rigorous, rational standard of value to judge human beings by, just like in science, we have, you know, rigorous standards by means of what properly goes into steel formation and what doesn't. And that principle is that life is the standard of moral value. We judge people, you know, by reference to that.
Now, what I find special in objectivism is the focus in justice, not so much in correcting, not only in correcting faults, but also in recognizing the good. My favorite scene in Atlas Shrugged is the first meeting between Francisco and Reardon. And basically what happens is Francisco is telling him, thank you on behalf of those people who should have thanked you for protecting us from the storm, literally and metaphorically. So this is an act of justice. An act of justice is not just saying, oh, look what that person did. An act of justice is also saying, thank you for what you've done for me. So it's recognizing the good. It's basically giving everyone their due based on what they have done.
Yeah, there's an important principle that I love in objectivism, that although it's important to punish the evil, it's more important to reward the good. And again, remember the scene in Atlas when Dagny's in Atlantis, but one of the heroes says, well, if you went to heaven and you met all these great heroes, what would you say to them? And she said, well, just, you know, thank you. You know, I guess he said, and he said, no, there's something else you'd want to, you know, say to them, and that you'd want to hear from them, and that is, well done. You know, well done. You applaud Aristotle and, you know, and Newton and all the Ayn Rand and all these great achievers who are responsible for, you know, for the just for the ease of life, you know, and the values that we have that make life so much better in the modern technologically advanced world, you know, and a world where we have philosophy and the arts, and Ayn Rand has contributed so much that we say, well done. And the reason that's more, you know, we have to punish the Hitlers and the Stalins and the Bin Ladens and all those guys. We punish them, and then, you know, and then we hold up their crimes to remember, you know, so that we can avoid them in the future. We remember what it is. We know who the enemy is. We know who we have to fight. But at the same time, our focus is on, not on Stalin, but on George Washington, not as a slave owner, but as a founder of the American Republic. Our focus is not on James Joyce, who's a miserable writer, you know, but on Ayn Rand. Our focus isn't on Kant, who's a terrible philosopher, but on Aristotle, because that those who give life, those who sustain life, those who make life possible are metaphysically more important than those who.
So I have one more question with justice, and it has to do with the issue of revenge. So the question is, quite often, justice is not delivered. And then the question is, should you go out of your way to make sure that justice is delivered? So let's say someone has harmed you years ago. Should you, and let's say they have escaped the law, should you hunt them down and maybe hurt them or deliver justice based on hopefully a rational standard? A, is this vigilantism? But B, even if you do it in the most rational way, so to speak, would this be a deviation from the path that you go after values and you go after a negative? Or is it that if it's so important, you should still do it and not let them get away with it? So one example would be, for example, Mossad going after what's his name, Eichmann for decades.
The Black September guys who killed those Israeli athletes at the '72 Olympics. The
Yes,
Mossad.
or as for example, George mentioned in the comments, Ragnar's Danesgjöld, and Ragnar tells us that most of my friends do not approve of what I do, which means it's not an issue which is black and white, so to speak. It's an issue that that can have different interpretations. So what's your comment on that? Should we go in a way out of our way? Because the guy has like the most beautiful woman and all these beautiful ideas, and he's risking his life, although he thinks he's safe, but he's not safe. He's risking his life. So should we go out of their way to pursue justice and maybe become Batman or whatever?
You know, one of my favorite novels, Nikos, is on that theme, and that's Alexander Dumas' The Count of Monte Cristo. You know, which is a great book, great story, and it's all about this guy going after people who done him wrong, you know, and getting these guys and giving them what they deserve. Yeah, I think, you know, if the law doesn't protect the innocent and the bad guys perpetrate heinous crimes and legally get away with it, then I can understand the victim, like Edmond Dantes in the Count of Monte Cristo, going after the bad guys and getting justice. In that context, revenge is a form of justice. If even though it's extra legal or outside the law, that is, if the person who's pursuing revenge was innocent, and not some criminal whose gang members were shot by another criminal, but some honest person who's victimized by bad guys, and the legal system doesn't protect the honest person, and the only way to get redress is to go outside the law. Morally, I can understand that. Vigilantism, I think, in that context, is morally justified. The interesting question to me is that since, you know, civilized society requires, you know, an objective code of law, and vigilantism, you know, flouts that, is the morally right thing to do after you bring justice to the bad guys, is it to turn yourself into the legal system and then take the punishment that the legal system would dress out to the vigilantes? And I think the answer to that is yes, because I think it supports law and the legal system. I think in that context, the vigilante is morally justified. I think the right thing to do after he brings justice is turn himself in to the legal system to maintain law and to maintain, you know, a civilized society, which requires a legal code.
I think that's clear. I don't agree necessarily on whether I turn myself in, whether it was a clear case of injustice, but I totally get the principle, because otherwise we get into vigilantism and no one wants that. So the last, again, unless people have a question on justice, so the last virtue we're going to discuss is independence. So the way I understand it, independence is related to what in the Fountainheads it talks as first-handedness, and here's how Rand describes it. Independence. It means one's acceptance of the responsibility of forming one's own judgments and of living by the work of one's own mind, which is the virtue of independence. And again, for me here, the trap is to take this out of context and say, for example, well, Alex Jones is an independent spirit. He doesn't believe the crooked media. He doesn't believe this. So, or people saying, who is to say, I don't believe anyone. I have my own intrinsic or whatever views. So why don't you tell us a bit more about independence and tell us what is the proper context in which you should be based only on what your mind is telling you, or judging things that you believe based on your, and Daniel, as he does for every virtue, so thank you, gives us also the proper definition from God's speech. Andy.
Again, my all-time favorite novel, I say this over and over again, is The Fountainhead. And you know, in The Fountainhead, of course, the theme is independence. What did Ayn Rand say? It's individualism versus collectivism, not in politics, but in man's soul. Oh, that is just brilliant. And Howard Roark, you know, you look up the word independent in the dictionary, and there's a picture of Howard Roark, right? I mean, it's the most brilliant thing ever written. on independence, and Leonard Peikoff gives a beautiful formulation of it, that independence involves a primary orientation towards reality, not towards other people. And so you judge the situation based on your own mind's honest assessment of the facts, whether other people are for it or against it. I'll give you a good example of that. I mean, it was very timely. For the Objective Standard, I just reviewed Talib Stark's book, Black Lives Matter, LIES, Black Lives Matter. And he really goes, and this was written 4 years ago, he really goes after BLM, Black Lives Matter, because he points out that over 90% of Black murder victims in the United States are killed by Black thugs, and 10% or fewer by whites, Asians, or Latinos, and a relative handful by police officers. And yet BLM doesn't make a peep about all this carnage, from Black thugs. But anytime somebody is killed by a white guy, even if it's self-defense, like in the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case, they protest, or sometimes they even riot. Now, Talib Starks knows he's gonna be hammered by the leftist establishment, including Black leftists, but he's going by the facts. He's looking at reality. He's saying, look, if we care about Black lives, as we should, then we should focus on the gravest danger of Black lives, thugs, what he calls the urban terrorists. And he's going to get hammered by the leftist establishment, including Black leftists, and he is. But there's real independence, a primary orientation towards the facts, towards reality, not towards what other people think, say, or believe. He's a Howard Rorkin. Talib Starks is a Howard Rorkin in this case, and I salute him, and I think everybody should read his book, Black Lives Matter.
I think it's the most difficult thing is to be independent nowadays, because the cost is high, but I would say the cost of not being is higher. So think about it. Some years ago, if you didn't speak up, the risk was someone might look you in a weird way in the corridor of the university. If you don't speak up now, the cost is that more and more people are going to lose their jobs. The stakes go high. So every time you fake reality or you don't speak what you see, the price we're going to pay next time is going to be worse and worse and worse. So the interesting thing with values and virtues, Andy, is that at the end of the day, they're all interconnected. Basically, in a way, rationality is the basis for every other virtue. So, for example, independence is, I'm going to follow my rational judgment. Justice is, I'm going to be rational on how I judge people. Productiveness is, I'm going to rationally decide what the world needs from me, and I will work for it. Okay, don't quote me on this, but every single virtue goes back, if you think about it, to rationality. So all the virtues and all the values, in a way, the one is related to the other. So, for example, if you haven't got a purpose, what are you productive for? If you haven't got self-esteem, where is pride directed to? So, as like parting words, and unless we have any other comments from the audience, I would say that the takeaway is to see these things as part of an integrated, like reality-oriented life, and always see these within the context, that you need these things to live your life. So, yeah, this is not the 10 Commandments. This is not the like a religious thing. This is the tools to live a good justice. So, as our friend Daniel says, the Count of Monte Cristo is about justice. The Fountainhead is about independence. Atlas Shrugged is about rationality. Count of Monte Cristo is the only big suggestion by Andy that I haven't followed. I've read Sane, and I liked it so much that I reread it straight after I finished it. So I agree with what Daniel says, and this is tempting me to read the Count of Monte Cristo. So, Andy, any parting words on the issue of virtues?
Yeah, just to follow up on what you said, that Ayn Rand points out that these other virtues are just perspectives on rationality. So independence, for example, primary orientation towards reality, not towards other people. We have to be rational to look at the facts. Justice is judging people in accordance with a rational standard. Again, we have to be rational to formulate that standard. Integrity is commitment and action to rational principles. Again, we need to be rational. Productiveness requires rationality to learn how to grow crops and build houses and stuff. So all these other virtues are perspectives on rationality in a given context. So you see how integrated Ayn Rand's moral code, all integrated around the principle that reason or rationality is the primary means by which human beings survive on this earth and flourish. In effect, Ayn Rand is saying to us long before Star Trek, may you live long and prosper, right? If you want to live long and prosper, rationality is the means by which we do so.
Thank you, Andy. It's always a pleasure to have you, not only based on the knowledge that you have, but the way you express these things and the examples you give. I think they're very helpful in us understanding these issues. So thank you. Razi, do the outro.
Thank you, Nikos and Razi, for putting this on and for having me on. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it is an act of justice to not just say thank you, but well done. So thank you both and well done.